The source claims the emergency was triggered by a secret deal allegedly signed by Queen Camilla, a clandestine arrangement so controversial that it could fracture the monarchy itself. The whispers suggest this hidden agreement was uncovered by Princess Anne, but what stunned the nation most was not the secret itself, but the unprecedented gathering it forced. For the first time in years, Prince William and Prince Harry were summoned to the same table, bound by duty rather than choice. Harry, who had vowed to remain distant in California, was urged back across the Atlantic. William, the heir apparent, could no longer remain silent. What exactly did Camilla risk everything for? Why would Anne break decades of discretion to expose the truth? And what hidden evidence was powerful enough to bring the estranged brothers face to face in a Stay with us, because what unfolded inside that room may change the future of the monarchy forever. Princess Anne has always been called the backbone of the monarchy. While others sought the spotlight, Anne carved out her place through discipline, loyalty, and hard work. She never chased headlines, never indulged in glamour. She simply carried out her duties with relentless precision. But behind that stoic exterior lies a woman of sharp instinct, a guardian of her mother's legacy, who notices what others prefer to ignore. It was Anne, not the courtiers or even King Charles himself, who first sensed that something was wrong. According to palace insiders, the discovery began with a quiet review of financial records tied to crown charities. Anne had long been known for taking a personal interest in such matters, believing that transparency was the lifeblood of the monarchy. But what she saw in the papers chilled her. Signatures that bypassed normal channels, agreements marked urgent but never discussed in council meetings. The trail led back to Queen Camilla. At first, Anne resisted the urge to act. She had learned from decades in royal service that rash accusations were easily dismissed. Instead, she requested more documents, interviewed discreet aides, and pieced together the fragments. The picture that emerged was alarming. Camilla had allegedly signed a private arrangement with a foreign magnate, granting her family new visibility and influence within royal projects in exchange for financial contributions masked as philanthropy. To Anne, this was no technical oversight. This was a breach of principle. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had fought tirelessly to preserve the dignity of the crown through honesty and restraint. The idea that the monarchy could be cheapened by backroom deals struck Anne as intolerable. She confided in only a handful of trusted advisors, one of whom later revealed the Princess Royal believed the monarchy itself was in danger if silence continued. She approached her brother, King Charles, hoping to settle the matter quietly. But Charles, weary from health concerns and desperate to keep peace in his household, brushed her off. "Not now, Anne," he reportedly sighed, his voice heavy with fatigue. That dismissal sealed her decision. If the king would not act, she would. Within days, she drafted urgent letters. Each envelope bore her personal crest and carried a single message: a code-red meeting at Windsor Castle. Attendance was not optional. One letter went to Prince William, the heir apparent who had quietly shared his concerns about Camilla for years. The other went farther, across the Atlantic, addressed to Prince Harry. The choice to include Harry shocked the palace. Relations between the brothers had been frozen, their every reunion marked by tension. Yet Anne's summons carried undeniable weight. She was not simply asking for their presence, she was demanding it, invoking her authority as the custodian of Elizabeth's legacy. Royal aides whispered about the gravity of her move. Anne had never played political games. She was the blunt one, the workhorse, the sibling who rarely interfered in palace intrigue. If she was now calling for a code red, it meant she had seen evidence too serious to ignore. Anne does not exaggerate, one long-serving staffer said. If she says the monarchy is in danger, then it island. For decades, Anne had been underestimated, the dutiful daughter who kept out of scandals, while others drew attention. But now, her voice cut through the silence. She would not let her mother's legacy be dismantled by secrecy or ambition, and as her letters reached William and Harry, it became clear the Princess Royal had set in motion a confrontation that could alter the course of the crown. On the other side of the Atlantic, Prince Harry was living a life that many believed he had chosen forever. California sunshine, celebrity projects, and the freedom to speak without the heavy shadow of protocol. Yet behind the polished interviews and Netflix deals, insiders whispered of a restlessness in Harry, a man torn between independence and a duty that still haunted him. When the envelope from Princess Anne arrived, sealed with her insignia and marked urgent, that restlessness erupted into something he could no longer ignore. The letter was short, blunt, and devastatingly clear. A code-red meeting at Windsor. Attendance required. No details, no excuses. For Harry, it felt less like an invitation and more like a summons from the past he had tried so hard to leave behind. He read it once, twice, 3 times, pacing across the kitchen floor of his Montecito home. Meghan watched him silently, knowing from the expression on his face that something seismic had occurred. Insiders close to Harry later described his conflict. For years, he had spoken openly about feeling betrayed by the institution, suffocated by the media circus, and dismissed by his own family. He had sworn never to be dragged back into those gilded cages. And yet, Anne's words carried a gravity unlike anything else. She was not the type to dramatize, not the type to interfere without reason. If Anne was calling him home, it meant there was danger not just to the monarchy, but to the memory of his mother. What truly gnawed at him, sources suggest, was the mention of Camilla. Harry had never hidden his disdain for his stepmother. In his memoirs and interviews, he painted her as a figure who had manipulated her way into the spotlight at Diana's expense. The thought that Camilla might now be orchestrating secret deals to benefit her family reignited every ember of resentment that still smoldered in him. But returning was no simple decision. To walk back into Windsor would mean facing William the brother, with whom he had exchanged icy stares at funerals, awkward greetings at coronations, and long silences in between. It would mean confronting Charles, the father whose love Harry still craved, but whose choices had left scars. And it would mean standing once more under the gaze of the world's press, every step interpreted as weakness, betrayal, or desperation. Harry spent a sleepless night wrestling with the dilemma. Reports say he paced the garden until dawn, torn between defiance and duty. Meghan, ever pragmatic, is said to have told him, "If Anne is asking, you know it's serious. Go, but go for yourself, not for them." Those words tipped the balance. By morning, Harry had made his choice. Within hours, arrangements were quietly made. A private jet was secured, his team sworn to secrecy. No fanfare, no announcements, only a discreet departure from Los Angeles under the cover of night. As he boarded, one aide recalled him murmuring, "If this is about her again, I need to be there." The flight across the Atlantic was long and heavy with memories. Every mile carried him closer to a palace he had fled, closer to a family he had accused, closer to a history he could never truly escape. By the time the jet touched down in London, the reality was undeniable. Harry was back, not for reconciliation, but for confrontation. For the first time since stepping away, the Duke of Sussex was returning to Windsor at the request of the one royal whose word he still respected. Princess Anne had called, and Harry had answered. What awaited him inside the castle walls was uncertain, but he knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary family gathering. It was a reckoning. For Prince William, the letter from Princess Anne was not a summons, it was a mirror. Every word reflected the unease he had carried in silence for years. As the heir to the throne, William was trained to maintain composure, to never let the weight of the crown show in his posture or his voice. But when he read Anne's stark warning of a code red, he felt what every monarch dreads, the ground shifting beneath the institution he was sworn to protect. Unlike Harry, William had never left. He had endured every crisis, from the controversies surrounding Camilla to the endless scrutiny of his marriage, standing firm as the bridge between the monarchy's turbulent past and its uncertain future. But that very position made him vulnerable. He could not lash out like Harry, nor retreat like Charles. Every action, every word, would be recorded as the precedent of a future king, and in this case, silence was no longer an option. Sources say William was furious when he first read the details Anne had uncovered. It wasn't just the alleged deal itself that angered him, it was what it represented. To him, the monarchy's strength came from sacrifice, duty, and a clear line of legitimacy. If Camilla had indeed tried to bypass tradition to elevate her family, then it wasn't just a betrayal of protocol. It was an assault on everything his mother Diana had fought for, yet fury could not be his public face. Behind closed doors, aides reported William walking the halls of Kensington Palace late into the night, torn between loyalty to his father and loyalty to the crown itself. He knew that challenging Camilla openly would humiliate Charles and expose cracks in the royal household at a time when public trust was already fragile. But doing nothing would allow the perception that the monarchy had become a playground for personal interests. The looming presence of Harry complicated matters further. William had not shared a genuine conversation with his brother in years. Their encounters had been cold, rehearsed, and painfully awkward. The idea of sitting across a table from him on the same side, no less, was almost unthinkable. He hated the thought of appearing weak, one confidant explained. But deep down, he knew Anne was right. He couldn't ignore this any longer. Adding to the pressure were his memories of Diana. William often spoke of protecting her legacy, of ensuring that her sacrifices had meaning. The whispers that Camilla might be leveraging the monarchy for her own family's gain struck directly at those wounds. It was no longer abstract politics, it was personal. To remain silent would be to dishonor his mother's memory. So, William did what he had been trained to do. He prepared. He studied the files Anne had sent, rehearsed what questions he might ask, and steeled himself for confrontation. He knew Charles would resist, that Camilla would deny, and that Harry would come in with fire. His task would be to balance them all, without breaking the fragile thread holding the monarchy together. On the morning of the meeting, William confided to a trusted aide that he felt trapped in a paradox. "If I speak," he reportedly said, "I risk tearing the family apart. If I stay silent, I risk tearing the crown apart. Which is worse?" As his convoy prepared to leave for Windsor Castle, William looked every inch the calm, collected Prince of Wales. But inside, the weight of centuries pressed down on him. He was not just a son, not just a brother, he was the future king. And on that night, the decisions he made would echo through history. The night of the meeting was thick with tension, the kind that seemed to seep into the very stones of Windsor Castle. Few were told the details, and fewer still were permitted inside the chamber where history was about to bend. The corridors outside were silent, guards stationed at discreet intervals, their expressions betraying no hint of the storm brewing within. The palace had hosted centuries of councils and ceremonies, but this gathering carried an electricity unlike any other. It was not a coronation, not a state banquet, it was a reckoning. Inside the chamber, a long mahogany table dominated the room. Its polished surface reflected the low glow of antique lamps, casting shadows that seemed to echo the secrets of generations past. Princess Anne arrived first, her face set in its usual mask of stoic resolve. She did not bother with pleasantries. She was there as a sentinel, not a sister. Moments later, William entered, every step measured, his jaw tight. He greeted Anne with a nod, no words wasted. Then came Harry. For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. He walked in without hesitation, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. William looked up, their eyes locking briefly, a flash of recognition, tension, and unspoken history. They said nothing, but the silence between them spoke volumes. For the first time in years, they were in the same room, summoned not by ceremony, but by crisis. Finally, the door opened once more. Queen Camilla swept in, her expression carefully composed, as though this were just another routine engagement. But those present noted the stiffness in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands as she placed a folder on the table. She knew she was on trial, not formally but symbolically, and the verdict would be delivered, not by the courts, but by the family she had fought so hard to join. King Charles was absent. His health and his weariness had kept him away, though whispers suggested he also preferred not to face what was coming. His absence left a vacuum, one that Anne was determined to fill. Anne began. Her voice was calm, clipped, and mercilessly precise. She laid out the documents she had gathered, signatures, correspondences, financial trails that led directly to Camilla's office. "This is not hearsay," she said firmly. "These are facts." She did not raise her voice, yet every word struck with the weight of authority. Camilla responded quickly, her tone defensive but smooth. She claimed the deal was intended for charitable expansion, that it had been misunderstood, that the urgency justified her discretion. "It was for the good of the crown," she insisted, her voice carrying a practiced conviction. But Harry broke the silence, his voice sharp and filled with years of pent-up resentment. "The good of the crown or the good of your family?" The question cut through the air like a blade. William shifted uncomfortably, but Anne did not flinch. She had expected Harry's fire, in fact, she had counted on it. Camilla's composure wavered for a moment, but she pressed on. "You misunderstand the intention. This was meant to protect the monarchy, not weaken it." Yet her words rang hollow against the quiet fury in the room. William finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Then why was it hidden? Why were we not told? Transparency is the foundation of trust. Without it, the institution crumbles." His words were less emotional than Harry's, but no less devastating. The chamber fell into silence. Outside, the world remained unaware of the drama unfolding within those walls. But inside Windsor Castle, under the weight of history and the shadow of the crown, the lines were being drawn. Anne looked at Camilla with an expression that combined disappointment and resolve. "This cannot stand," she declared. "The monarchy is not yours to reshape." And with that, the meeting was no longer about one deal, one decision. It had become a confrontation over the very soul of the monarchy itself. The silence that hung over the Windsor chamber was unbearable. For a moment, no one moved, as though the weight of centuries pressed down on the table between them. And then it happened, the confrontation Anne had anticipated, the clash that everyone else feared. Harry leaned forward, his voice breaking the tension like thunder. "This is exactly what I warned about," he said, his tone sharp, his words laced with bitterness. "Backroom deals. Manipulations. Using the crown not for service, but for power. It's what destroyed my mother's peace, and it's happening again." His fists clenched, the anger in his eyes unmistakable. Camilla drew in a breath, her mask cracking. "How dare you?" she snapped, her voice trembling between outrage and indignation. "I have given everything to support this family, to support your father, and you," she gestured toward Harry with disdain. "You abandoned us, you abandoned him." The air thickened. William, until now silent, could no longer contain himself. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice steady but charged with emotion. He turned to Camilla. "This isn't about Harry. This is about you and the choices you made without consent, without counsel, without respect for the institution you swore to uphold." Anne's gaze moved between them, her sharp eyes glinting. She had seen royal tempers flare before, but this was different. This was personal, raw, and dangerously close to tearing the room apart. Harry's voice rose again. "You speak of sacrifice, but whose sacrifice? My mother's? She gave her life to this institution, and it swallowed her whole. And now you think you can twist the crown to your own ends? Not while I'm alive." His words struck like a hammer, reverberating through the chamber. Camilla's face flushed. She lifted her chin, trying to reclaim authority. "Your mother," she began, but William cut her off, his voice sharper than it had been in years. "Do not speak of her," he said, his tone ice cold. The sudden steel in his voice silenced the room. For the first time, William and Harry stood aligned, their words directed at the same adversary. The irony was not lost on Anne, who sat quietly, watching the brothers draw together like two blades in the same scabbard. Camilla faltered. For decades, she had fought for legitimacy, endured criticism, and finally achieved her place beside the king. But now, in the very heart of Windsor, she found herself cornered by the late Queen's daughter and the two sons of Diana. The symmetry was cruel, almost poetic. "You've crossed a line," Anne said, her voice calm but unyielding. "This family survives on trust, not ambition. Once trust is gone, there is nothing left." Camilla's eyes flickered with anger. "You speak as though I am an intruder," she retorted. "But I am the Queen. I am the wife of the king." "And yet," William replied coldly, "you are not the crown. The crown belongs to the people, and it will not be bartered in secret." The chamber erupted into overlapping voices, Harry demanding accountability, Camilla defending her intentions, William insisting on transparency, Anne reminding them all of their duty. The words collided, sharp and unforgiving, until the atmosphere grew so heavy that even the lamps seemed to flicker. Finally, Anne struck her hand against the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. The room fell silent. "This ends tonight," she declared. "The monarchy cannot endure another betrayal. If we do not act with integrity, then we are no better than the critics say." The confrontation had reached its peak. Lines had been drawn. Camilla stood isolated, her defenses crumbling under the combined force of William, Harry, and Anne. For the first time, the brothers stood side by side, not as estranged siblings, but as sons of Diana united, however briefly, against the woman they both distrusted. What came next was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The fragile balance of power inside Windsor Castle had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. While Windsor Castle tried to keep its walls sealed, whispers have a way of escaping into the night. Within hours of the code-red meeting, fragments of information began to leak. Aides spoke in hushed tones. Journalists picked up subtle shifts in palace schedules, and soon the British tabloids were buzzing with rumors. A midnight confrontation, raised voices, and the brothers unexpectedly standing together. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Headlines screamed across front pages, Windsor showdown, brothers united against Camilla. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, tourists mingling with loyalists, all demanding answers. Social media erupted with hashtags like #CodeRedWindsor and #Diana's Sons, propelling the story into a global frenzy. For many, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. William and Harry, who had spent years in bitter estrangement, were suddenly rumored to have spoken with one voice. Commentators across television networks debated what it meant. Was this a temporary truce born of necessity, or the beginning of a genuine reconciliation? And more pointedly, what did it mean for Queen Camilla's standing? Polls conducted overnight showed a dramatic dip in public approval for Camilla. Once tolerated, if never fully embraced, her image now teetered on the edge of crisis. Many recalled the decades-old wounds of Diana's story, resurfacing like scars torn open anew. If Diana's sons do not trust her, why should the people? One commentator asked bluntly. The sentiment spread quickly, echoing through breakfast tables and digital feeds across the Commonwealth. Support for Anne soared. Known for her unglamorous dedication and blunt honesty, she was suddenly cast as the heroine of the hour, the one who dared to speak when others remained silent. Editorials praised her courage, framing her as the true protector of Elizabeth II's legacy. In contrast, King Charles was criticized for his absence, with newspapers wondering why the sovereign had allowed his wife to face such accusations alone. Beyond Britain, the story reverberated internationally. American networks highlighted Harry's return, portraying him as the reluctant prince dragged back into a drama he had tried to escape. In Europe, the focus was on William, the future king, forced to choose between loyalty to his father and loyalty to the crown. Everywhere the narrative was the same. The monarchy stood at a crossroads, and its stability hung in the balance. Ordinary citizens voiced their feelings with striking passion. Outside Kensington Palace, one woman told reporters, "We love Diana. Seeing her sons finally together again, it gives us hope. But if Camilla is undermining them, she should step aside." Across the Atlantic, American audiences sympathized with Harry's plight, many praising his courage to confront the very institution that had once driven him away. Even within Parliament, whispers began to stir. A handful of MPs suggested that the monarchy could not afford another scandal of trust, especially at a time when calls for republicanism were growing louder in parts of the Commonwealth. The debate spilled from drawing rooms into public chambers. Was Camilla a stabilizing presence or a liability? Inside the palace, aides scrambled to manage the fallout. Official statements were drafted, carefully worded to emphasize unity and dismiss speculation. But the damage was done. Once whispers of betrayal escape into the public, they take on a life of their own. For the monarchy, perception has always been power, and in the eyes of millions, perception had shifted dramatically. Camilla was now cast as the villain, Anne the truth-teller, and William and Harry estranged no longer as reluctant heroes bound together by their mother's shadow. It was a narrative that no press office could fully contain, and with every headline, every broadcast, the pressure mounted on Buckingham Palace to respond. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle, the ancient stone walls seemed to exhale after a night of storm. Inside the chamber, the confrontation had ended not with agreement, but with exhaustion. Documents lay scattered across the table, words left hanging in the air, and the four figures who had clashed so fiercely now sat in heavy silence. Nothing had been resolved, yet everything had changed. Anne was the first to rise. She collected her papers with the brisk efficiency of someone who had no interest in theatrics. "This will not disappear," she said quietly, her words carrying more weight than any shouted accusation. She left the chamber with the steady stride of a soldier, her role clear: guardian of her mother's legacy, custodian of the crown's conscience. William lingered, his gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table, as though searching for answers etched in the wood. For him, the night had crystallized a truth he could no longer deny. The monarchy's survival depended not on silence, but on courage. Yet the price of courage might be the fracture of his own family. When he finally stood, his shoulders bore the unmistakable weight of kingship long before the crown would rest upon his head. Harry remained seated, his eyes burning with emotions he could not easily name: anger, grief, vindication, and something unexpected: solidarity. For the first time in years, he had not stood alone. However temporary, he and William had spoken side by side. That sliver of unity stirred something deep within him, though he knew better than to believe the wounds were healed. As he prepared to return across the ocean, He carried with him not reconciliation, but the memory of a night when he was once again a son of Diana, fighting for her truth. Camilla sat in silence, her composure cracking at last. She had weathered decades of criticism, survived scandal after scandal, and emerged as queen beside Charles. But the events of the night left her isolated, her authority questioned, her loyalty doubted. The whispers of betrayal would not vanish easily. She understood that perception was power, and perception had turned against her. Beyond the walls of Windsor, the world continued to spin. Headlines multiplied, speculation deepened, and the monarchy's image trembled on the edge of uncertainty. Supporters clung to the vision of William and Harry united, if only briefly, as a beacon of hope. Critics declared that the crown had revealed its fragility yet again, trapped in personal feuds and hidden agendas, and King Charles? He remained in the background, his absence from the meeting drawing as much criticism as the confrontation itself. Some said he was too frail to intervene, others that he was too cautious to confront his wife. Whatever the reason, the void he left only heightened the drama, painting a portrait of a monarchy adrift. By the time the sun fully rose, the palace had returned to its outward calm. Guards marched their routines, tourists pressed against the gates, and official statements promised unity and stability, but inside, every member of that midnight gathering knew the truth. The fractures had deepened and the battle for the monarchy's soul was far from over. As Harry's plane prepared for takeoff, William watched from Kensington, and Anne busied herself with duties once more. The question lingered like a spectre over the kingdom. Had the family found a new path forward, or had they merely delayed an inevitable collapse? No one could answer. Not yet. But one thing was certain, the night of the Code Red had written itself into history, a chapter of shadows and confrontations that would haunt the monarchy for years to come.